We are live.
All right, welcome back to the House Judiciary Committee this afternoon, Wednesday, February 18th. We're going to hear for, I think we're down to 2 minutes from Trevor Squirrel on telling us how this whole vacancy savings thing is calculated and works. Or doesn't work, the case may be.
All right, that's the question. Representative Trevor Squirrel with House Appropriations. Best way to explain it, it's part of the budget process, right? So departments and agencies in their budget development are asked to look at what they project for the coming year, let's say for FY27, what they will have for open positions and what those dollars are that are attached to that. Department of Finance and Management, when they get the development of the budget from the departments and agencies, they'll look at that number amongst other things. But they'll also make a comparison to the information that's in human resources, usually in the August, September, when they update positions that are available and there's dollars attached to all those positions. And so if I'm a department or an agency and I come in and say, I want a vacancy savings of $500,000 for 3 positions, and F&M goes and looks at the database and said, well, over the last 3 years, you essentially have had 10 positions, then it's incumbent on the department and the agency to explain why you need something different this time. You have to make your case. If you don't make your case, then F&M can go back and say, this is your vacancy savings based on that data. Right? And I think one of the questions that came up in here before is that if in fact X amount of vacancy savings is put in, which accounts for X number of positions, and you fill those positions going forward, then you're in a position of having to cut positions, then I think that's a legitimate concern for a committee like this. And for us to say, then that's probably not a valid vacancy savings going forward, right?
Trevor, can you explain that again? You said if there's open positions and you fill them.
No, let's say I present the budget to Finance and Management in fall of 25 for 27 budget, right? And at the time I had X number of positions and I put that in my budget based on historical data. And then through some whatever, I was able to fill those positions. And then if the budget passes, I would have to cut positions to bring it back to the vacancy savings that's in the GovRec vacancy savings in the budget. To me, that's a legitimate question for our committee and for your committee to say, that doesn't make sense, and we should make some adjustment to that. I suspect that Finance and Management, if you give them a reasonable argument, would also agree with that change. Okay, so I help understand how it works. So
if state's attorneys, for instance, are coming to us and saying, the one thing we need top of our list is to get rid of the vacancy savings. For state's attorneys, they say $330,000. Our question probably should be, if we don't give that to you, you're just not going to fill positions that have been open for a while, as opposed to
losing positions. I think that's a good question. And that's the way it should get answered. I mean, they should answer it that way.
And the other question would be that position you've been trying to fill in Orange County for the last year is just really difficult to fill, but it's still a very much a needed position. That's another thing we could hear. I don't know if that's the point.
Yeah, the vacancy savings does nothing with the positions that are available to an agency or department. They don't go away. They're just not filled, right?
Right. But if they need to fill the position.
Well, if they need to fill them, but historically they haven't been able to fill them, Finance and Management is going to say no.
Okay. Right. So, Angela, can you have a question?
I did a few minutes ago. Well, it's a point in time.
It's a point in time for Finance and Management.
Yeah.
At it. And certainly the departments and agencies can use that same data, right, to make their decision also.
Is there ever, would we ever expect to see in the recommended budget something that's called vacancy savings, but in fact pertains to positions that were already filled, or would that just, that would be called something else? That's saying we need to cut 4 positions, but rather than calling it vacancy savings, right?
Removing positions as
Removing.
opposed.
Yeah, I've never known in my X number of years in appropriations, a department agency come to me and say, please take these positions away from me.
Well, no, but if it's, is that ever in a recommendation in the budget? You, Department of State Attorneys and Sheriffs.
There is a process, but if positions don't get filled, human resources can pull them back into the pool. In other words, take them from the department, so it's no longer available to the department, but there's still a position in state government.
But that wouldn't be called vacancy savings for
That's
that
nothing to do
department?
with that.
Okay. I get it.
Sure.
I have 2 questions. I apologize if you don't have time.
Sorry.
What, you gotta go. Did you mention that there's an appeal process that a department could do?
There's no appeal process, it's just make the case.
Okay, you have to make, so if they found that they could, but that would need to be before the budget went up.
Well, it's part of the budget process, discussion, right? So as a department, you're presenting the budget of finance and management.
Yeah.
Your vacancy savings in your budget that you're presenting is different than what historical data might show. So finance and management will say why.
And so we could also assume that that process probably happened. I mean, we can ask too, but then finance and management, for whatever reason, they may have heard that and they're like, well, we're still keeping it.
That's entirely possible.
Okay. My other question is switching topics, so I'll look to the chair to see if it's appropriate. But we also had confusion about what limited service position meant in asking them to be made permanent. Like, what does that involve financially, or how?
It means nothing financially.
Okay.
Whether it's salary and or benefits, doesn't make any difference. Not temporary to positions. Okay? There's a difference. And there's very few temporary positions in that limited service. The use of limited service positions typically is because you just received a federal grant for 3 years. And you need 10 employees to execute that grant, but it's time limited. So that's the purpose of limited service positions. When we did some work a number of years ago on funding the criminal justice system after the pandemic, we did a lot of actually limited service positions with increased positions because we thought over time they wouldn't be needed. Agency of Natural Resources received a lot of ARPA money into the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. So we actually gave them 50 limited service positions, which are all phasing out. Now, and generally, when a limited service position is given, human resources or someone, there's an agreement as to what that end date is. Okay. And sometimes it's arbitrary, and we've had to go back and change them. And in the case of some, we did limited service positions a couple of years for state attorneys and for judiciary, but there was no end date on it. And we converted those limited service positions for state attorneys last year to permanent classified. And then the judiciary still has limited service positions that are in their base budget that have no end date. So we're probably going to convert them this year.
Okay.
Which is probably a request we got from judiciary.
Yeah, that's their
Yes.
top request.
But it's not a budget.
But there was no end date on those limited service positions.
But that's something we should ask, or you ask, and like it's like, because we also heard that for some, there is an end date. I think it was for judiciary positions of 2027 or 2028. So like,
A lot of them do. have
Yeah.
End dates.
so is it possible that you can either extend the end date or you turn it to a permanent? Is there a difference
Maybe.
between?
Well, the only difference would be that if I'm a department or agency hiring folks, much easier to hire someone for permanent classified than limited service. To me, that's the biggest difference. So it's hard to keep people.
Yeah, so the positions the judiciary has right now, you said usually they'll come, those positions will be funded through grants and that type of thing. Are those positions funded through grants, or are they?
No,
federal?
not in the case of the judiciary or the state attorney. What I was saying before is that typically limited service positions, the way to look at limited service is limited, right? So typically when you get federal grants, we can time limited. That's where you see a lot of limited service positions. In the case of the state's attorneys and judiciary, we did limited service position because we thought what we were offering may have a short-term need.
Yeah.
It's ended up being a longer-term need, quite frankly. Okay, so it's a little different animal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Longer term need, not necessarily longer than the short.
That's probably, yeah.
No, did you say that you guys are having a discussion about making the judiciary positions permanent?
They have a request to us of those positions as it came to this committee. We both have that request. So we need to act.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So it would, I guess there'd be some choices to make, either just to continue to extend the timeline on it or make them
Since
permanent.
there's no end date and it's in their base budget, if we make no decision, they'll still have the position.
Oh, okay.
Okay, all right, thank you very much, Trevor, for
Anytime,
helping.
Anytime you want to.
except after lunch.
Feel free. All right, so we're gonna move on to.
Thank you.
S-209, relating to prohibiting civil arrest in sensitive locations, and we're gonna start with legislative counsel. Rick, thank you for being here and join us and walk us through.
Thank you for working my schedule.
Yeah, thank you.
Busy afternoon.
Yes, they are.
Rick Sagal with the Office of Legislative Counsel. It's good to be back in House Judiciary.
Let's have you back.
I felt like I got banned for a little bit, but maybe I'm welcome back with open arms.
Done.
Not a ban? Okay.
Let's not be too.
It's a temporary holding. So S-209, share my screen. I can't remember. Yes or no? Do you have a preference?
I think we have copies on everything. We all have copies, I believe, so.
All right.
Helpful for,
And what's that?
helpful for folks online.
Okay, sure, share your screen, sure, go.
And
go.
audience.
The last person that speaks.
Yeah, the last person that speaks. And just so you know, is it pronounced Abo? Did I pronounce that right?
Abel?
Abel? I am, sorry, apologize. So you're gonna hear him in the background a little bit. He's translating. I just want, folks to know that's happening. And so. But go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you, Mr. Chair. S-209. I want to start with a little background on the bill before I get into the language on the page here. So, you'll see in the beginning of this statute, 12 VSA 3577, there is a privilege from arrest. And this is a very, very old law. It's so old that there's no date of when the General Assembly actually enacted the law. It predates the system in which we included the session and the date that we actually passed the law.
Michael Chernick can find that out.
He probably could. He probably could. If you really want to know, Mr. Chair, I will get that for you. But this is a general kind of common law privilege that is thought to exist for government officials. And you'll see the language here. The governor, lieutenant governor, state treasurer, and you all, members of the General Assembly, when you attend the State House, you are privileged from arrest. And there are a couple of exceptions, like felonies. You don't get that privilege if you commit a felony. However, there's the idea that when a elected official goes to their place where they do their business, the state's business, you should be privileged from arrest. All right, that's kind of common law principle that Vermont codified decades ago. Okay. In 2022, the General Assembly decided to take up the idea of another common law civil arrest idea, and that's courthouse arrests. So in the same statute, and I'll get here in a second, the General Assembly in 2022 updated 3577 to prohibit civil arrests in and around courthouses. And this applied to everybody, not just elected officials, but people who are going to a courthouse, returning from a courthouse, on their way to a courthouse. They are protected from civil arrest. And you may wonder, what is a civil arrest? The two words kind of are oxymoron, right? How can you get civilly arrested? It's not common. A civil arrest, people think arrest, you think handcuffs, you think you're, going to a holding facility. Civil arrest is not quite that in many aspects. The most common type of civil arrest is a contempt of court, where you're in a courtroom and you argue with the judge, or you say something that the judge deems unworthy of the court, and you are held in contempt. You've probably seen it in movies. Take this person away, they're in contempt of court, right? That is a civil arrest, okay? Another civil arrest is, let's say you have a subpoena to go to court because you're a witness and you received the subpoena for February 18th, 2026 at 9 a.m. and you don't show up. The court could send the sheriff or whatever law enforcement works at the court and come and get you. Go to your house, go to your place where you work, grab you, take you to court to be a witness in a proceeding. There's also the immigration civil arrest, where the Immigration Nationality Act, through administrative warrants, not criminal warrants, administrative warrants, allows federal officials to civilly arrest somebody who they suspect is here without authorization. Any questions about that general civil arrest?
Thank you.
Now I understand there's criminal and civil arrests regarding being here not lawfully, I guess. And that would depend on how you got here. So I don't know how I would know the difference. If somebody crosses deceptively, I understand that's a misdemeanor. That's a crime. If you overstay, that's a civil.
So there are different ways that the law defines someone that is here without authorization. There are a couple of times that it is a criminal issue. Most of the people that are here without authorization, it's not a criminal offense, it's a civil offense.
It's an overstay or something.
Yeah, or a visa, or even people seeking asylum who come here, that would not be even a civil wrong. But certainly there is a line distinction. It gets fuzzy. And I may have a colleague come in, and if that's a question specific to the immigration offenses, what is criminal, what is civil, we can do that. But this would just apply to the people who are here in a civil offense manner, if that makes sense. Okay. So words on the paper. Page 1, no change to the current law, but you'll see I'm going to start at the bottom of page 1. This is the prohibition that currently exists in law. A person shall not be subject to civil arrest while traveling to, entering, remaining at, or returning from a. Current law limits it to court proceedings. This was the 2022 edition the General Assembly made, where that is a protected place. And let me, again, take a pause here. This court proceeding protection has been a kind of common law principle for, I think it goes back to the English time, where there's this idea that when someone is due in court or they go to court, you don't arrest them in court. So Vermont and some other states decided to codify that. Vermont did it in 2022. Some states have not done it. Vermont did it, and a few other states have. So again, Vermont's intent back then was to codify this common law principle that going to court should protect you from civil arrest. So the bill S-209 adds, as you can see, several places that would be included as protected from civil arrest. A polling place, which is defined in a little bit, I'll get there. Educational institution, which is also defined, I'll get there. Social service establishment, which is defined here, includes a crisis center, a domestic violence shelter, a victim services center, a child advocacy center, supervised visitation center, family justice center, facility that serves disabled persons, homeless shelter, substance use disorder counseling and treatment facility, and an establishment distributing food or other essentials of life to people in need.
Before you move on, quick question, just because we're on this one, I'm just curious why this one is defined in the underlying statute and it's not just in the definition section, but the rest of the ones that are defined.
So I'll speak to the exact just why it's like this,
Yeah,
and not the intent maybe, but
okay.
the reason it's structured like this is because DHS, Department of Homeland Security, in 2021, I believe, had guidance. It wasn't law, but it was guidance they published for ICE Border Patrol employees to say, let's not conduct civil arrest in these places.
Yeah.
And this is almost verbatim the way it was. I think they included maybe one or two other things that the Senate Judiciary Committee did not include, but It was worded very similar to this. So that's why this one's a little bit different.
Just like took it in.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I think. Zach, while we're taking questions, polling place,
It's gonna get there.
you're gonna get that.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you're going through D, so I'm just, you'll come
Yep.
back to.
As I mentioned, we're going to define polling place and educational institution. Yep.
Right, I wasn't here for that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yep.
Appreciate the clarification though.
Subdivision E, place of worship, not defined. So happy to answer questions about that one if there are. 11.
Sure, I'll take that one.
Go for it.
I mean, just come from Mass. How is that defined broadly? I mean, that includes, I assume this includes synagogues, mosques.
So you're looking at the three words that define it. There's not a, it's not really a term of art. It's not really a statute we're cross-referencing. So in my opinion, it's fairly clear what we're talking about. But if there's a disagreement about to one person, this would be a place of worship. To someone else, it wouldn't be. We do use this phrase in Vermont in our statutes. So, but
I
again,
just think I would feel more comfortable probably getting a little bit more specific there. I just think if you carry that out to its natural conclusion, I think you could have individuals claiming faith protections where maybe they don't exist.
okay.
Yeah.
Could we get, when you have an opportunity, could we get some of the other statutes where this specific phrasing, place of worship, is used?
Sure.
And I'll add to that, if there is any court understanding of what that means, if there's any.
Any case law.
And I'll just, if there is case law, I would still advise you all, if you want to be specific, be specific. Like if you don't want it to be this general, then you should, use words that you want to use. So if you have a Supreme Court of Vermont case that says this is what this means, that's pretty good. But you could also intersect with some federal stuff here. So I would just advise if you don't like the words, if you don't think it's sufficient, then we should work on that. That's just going to be but again, happy to give you all this information.
And Rick, if you can just speak up a little bit, please.
Sure. Facility, subdivision F, that is regulated by the Child Development Division of the Department for Children and Families. Or licensed as a children's camp pursuant to 18 VSA 4301, or that serves as a day camp. So these two aren't intended to, when I get to educational institution, I will they're intended to include the after-school programs, the summer camps, and the day camps. My colleague Katie McGlynn helped kind of flesh this out a little bit. So because not every school has their after-school program at the school, is my understanding. I don't know for sure, but this is what I've been told. So this is intended to cover the after-school programs that are offsite, perhaps at a park or some other non-school building.
In terms of who pays for those camps, I'm thinking like Boys and Girls Club. Some of it is paid for by the state of Vermont, subsidized. Some of it is not subsidized by taxpayers. I just think, is in statute, does it clarify who is paying for these programs, or are they just generally available?
I don't know. I don't think so, but I can double check.
I think we'll want to dig in there.
I'm quite certain the day camp can be a private entity that.
Right, but I'm not necessarily thinking that. I'm thinking about both Boys and Girls Clubs, because I know, for instance, in Rutland County, a lot of them are subsidized by the taxpayers. So I think I will want to understand what that means.
Okay, then you have subdivision G, a healthcare facility, as that term is defined in 18 VSA 94026. I don't have that pulled up, but you're welcome to look at that cross-reference. It's very detailed on the types of facilities that includes. Okay, exceptions. This is currently in law, and I'll explain why some of it has been changed. So subdivision 1, which is all those places, including courthouses, subdivision 1 shall not apply to an arrest pursuant to a judicially issued warrant or a court order. So think about that, right? If somebody, police officer, state, federal, whoever, has a judicial warrant, which is going to be a criminal issue, you can arrest somebody in a church, you can arrest somebody in a courthouse. That this prohibition is only for civil arrests that are not backed by a judicial warrant. B, an arrest for contempt of the court where the proceeding is occurring. So if there is someone in a courtroom that has been issued a order of contempt, that person can still be taken away. This law does not prevent that specific instance of a civil arrest. Or C, an arrest to maintain order or safety in the court where the proceeding is occurring. The remedy section has been adjusted a little bit because this was written for a court proceeding. So I had to kind of reword how this is done. Nothing really changed substantively, but I do want to clarify what I've done here. So remedies, a person who violates the subsection, meaning a civil arrest, by knowingly and willfully executing or assisting with an arrest, prohibited by subdivision 1 of the subsection. The old language or the current language is shall be subject to contempt proceedings. That doesn't make sense because if you are arrested in a hospital, that's not really a contempt situation there. It applies to courtrooms. So the languages may be liable in a civil action for false imprisonment. That's current language. And shall be subject to contempt proceedings if the arrest is pursuant to a court proceeding. Again, just kind of restructuring how that is laid out. A person, I'm going to read this because these are the remedies. It's important to know what you're looking at here. Subdivision B, a person who is arrested in violation of this subsection may bring a civil action against the violator for damages, injunctive, equitable, or declaratory relief, punitive damages, and reasonable costs and attorney's fees. The Office of the Attorney General may bring a civil action on behalf of the state of Vermont for appropriate injunctive, equitable, or declaratory relief if there is reasonable cause to believe that a violation has occurred or will occur.
Office of the Attorney General, would this necessarily always default to her office in her purview? Or can we make a case for state's attorneys?
Well, so the current law is the AG, but you can certainly discuss, changing that if you think it's a good idea.
Well, I'm sure she was consulted to make sure that she has bandwidth to take this on.
She, meaning the current AG?
Yeah.
So I didn't write the 2022 law. I would always advise committees don't assume it's the same person, right? Because the AGs change, AGs come and go. So I don't know if the AG was consulted. I assume they came in and testified, or at least one of the assistant AGs. But if you want to change that, it's something we can talk about.
I mean, does most civil action fall within her purview, or
do most civil actions fall in that office? In what regard? Any civil matter or
just generally speaking? Like this seems like,
I mean,
does it seem like an anomaly to you or reasonable that this wouldn't necessarily fall under her purview?
I don't do a lot of Title 12, so I don't know if that's common. Maybe a question for one of my colleagues or the chair may know.
Did you draft this? Did you draft this language?
Not the underlying language.
Okay.
It's 2022.
Okay.
Yeah, no, this is current language.
Okay.
Yep. D, no action under the subsection shall be brought against the judiciary or any of its members or employees for actions taken to maintain order or safety in the courts. You have me for about 7 more minutes, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Okay. The section shall not be construed to limit or infringe upon any right, privilege, or remedy available under common law or any other provision of law or rule. Notwithstanding section 3578, the protections and remedies afforded by the subsection apply irrespective of when the privilege against civil arrest is invoked. Okay, so these are the. Okay,
When you're done.
almost done. The definition section. So civil arrest, that main definition stays the same. It means an arrest for purposes of obtaining a person's presence or attendance at a civil proceeding, including an immigration proceeding. That has not changed. Subdivision I, civil arrest does not include
It's Roman.
Romanet 2.
Here we go.
That's Judiciary. I almost said Romanet, but I didn't. Does not include temporary custody of a person pending a warrant. I'm going to read both of these and I'll explain them. Pending a warrant pursuant to 18 as a VSA 7505B, or holding a person for admission to a hospital for an emergency examination pursuant to 18 VSA 7504. These two types of custodies are mental health situations. Somebody is a danger to themselves or others. And under current Vermont law, you can look at these two statutes. It allows either law enforcement or a mental health professional to temporarily hold a person pending either an examination or a warrant. That person's more long-term custody. So the intent of the bill is not to include those two things in this prohibition.
What other type? There's other types of civil arrest warrants that are non. Because they're a judicial warrant, does that make them exempt from this?
So there's more civil arrest warrants. Can you name one that I could maybe think about?
Yeah. Child support.
That would be one. So yeah, a civil, it would be, if it's a judicial warrant, then it would be outside the scope of this, where you could conduct that. But if there is no,
It
if
could be a
it's,
civil judgment as well.
yeah, then they would apply to this. So child support, civil arrest cannot be conducted in these locations. Yes. Yes. It's like a subpoena, right? If you get a subpoena for a court and you don't show up, that's a civil arrest, right? If it's a child support order that you have not paid and you didn't go to court, or you have child support.
Right, but they do put bail on that.
So it could be an arrest warrant, and that would be different. If it's a judge signed warrant, it would not be a civil
Yeah,
warrant.
it would be a.
Right, it would be a judicial warrant, which would be outside the scope of this. So you may want testimony if you have a question about that.
Yeah, no, listen.
Yeah. Okay, educational institution. This is a list, a very comprehensive list that my colleague Beth St. James put together for the committee. That includes just about anything you could consider a school in Vermont, or a public school, independent school, a regional CTE center, an approved education program, a pre-qualified private pre-kindergarten provider, a post-secondary school, an educational program operated by, I believe that's BOCES, I've learned that recently, a tutorial program, an adult education and secondary credential program, and it also extends to grounds operated by, activities sponsored by, transportation provided by, and programs related to educational institutions.
I'm sure you guys have thought about this, but homeschooling, I'm sure it falls somewhere here.
Beth St. James, I think, is coming on Friday. She
So
will,
she'll be able to speak to that. But so to your knowledge, Rick, is homeschooling included?
I can't speak to it. I don't know.
You don't know? Okay.
Yeah.
Polling place, I think, again.
Yes. So polling place, I mentioned I'd get to it. It's it's a cross reference to 17 VSA 2505F. In that's the elections title. And the way it works is a municipality sends a list of locations before the election to the Secretary of State's office as like, these are our polling places for the next election. So that list would be considered a polling place. And it would be updated by the municipality when they send the list to the secretary every time there's an election. And it would take effect on passage.
Ian and Tom.
Two very quick questions. One, and maybe this is for, and I'm sorry, who was the other attorney?
So Beth St. James, education
Okay.
would be the,
I think I'll probably ask her, but I'm wondering, like, do we think that these definitions are going to change with the work that's being done in education?
good question for her.
Yeah, I'm going to ask. Yeah, I figured as much. And then the only other question was I'll look at 17 VSA 2502.
Yep.
Is it only when they're being used as polling places?
So another good question. I will not say because I do not know. I'm not going to guess. So I will get back to you on that one.
Okay,
And
great.
I think it may not be clear actually.
Yeah.
So maybe you can have a discussion about
Yeah.
about what you want to do with that.
Page one right at the bottom on line 21,
Yep.
Traveling to, entering, remaining at, returning from. Would, if somebody, was just leaving the building before they were going, say, to their vehicle to return from, is that a time that, a civil, arrest could be made?
So there's a lot of gray here.
Yeah.
And again, this is current law. I don't know. And some other states have kind of also worded this way. This is a popular way of doing it. To me, you want to be clear to law enforcement when they can and cannot effect a civil arrest.
Right.
So if you're the person, the suspect, and you tell the officer, I'm going to court or I'm coming back from school. If you're at the grocery store, maybe a harder argument to make. But if you're literally outside the school or you're outside the courtroom, I think the law enforcement would need to say, okay, this is likely a true story that they are returning or going to court. So did I go way over your question?
No, so I'm pretty sure what you said, if they're leaving the building and going to a vehicle, that would, be part of the definition of returning from.
So you're asking leaving the courtroom.
Or, yeah, whatever building,
Yeah, returning would be,
that would be considered returning.
right.
What if they didn't? What if they left the property and were on a public sidewalk or public road?
Yeah.
Just things going through my mind, does that make it more of a gray area where they aren't on that property any longer?
Are they returning from a courtroom? Have they stopped anywhere else in between the courthouse and their home office?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and, I mean, my guess is, this is, to me, I mean, I was around for when we, did the court proceedings thing. And I remember there was a lot of, deliberation and debate as far as, going further with it. And this is just an incredible expansion, that I never would have seen coming. But, and I know why the expansion is done. It's all done, around the immigration issues we have going on, but, and that leads me to my next question is, are the feds bound by this, or we don't know unless it's challenged?
This is a good, intergovernmental immunity question. I think my colleague Sophie was in here yesterday talking to you about that. They are bound by it under state law, right? That if you break this law, that the AG can bring in action, or the person that is arrested can bring in action. Is that person going to claim as a defense that I'm a federal employee? And you're talking about federal employees, because this applies to all law enforcement, right? So
Right. No, I'm talking
the federal aspect.
Because on 208, we're gonna, we've had the same discussion, whether the feds are even, have to follow these laws. So,
Yeah.
so that's why I'm bringing it up here.
So, and I do have.
Not that I expect a definitive answer, but.
Right, I wish.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't wish. Y'all wouldn't need me. There's one court decision from New York, which is nice. It's in our circuit, that New York has an executive order that applied just to state buildings, not the expansive. By the way, this is Vermont would be the first state to do this. This is very unique. The expansive list, you'd be the first in the country to do this. The state building, which is not in this bill, there was a provision in the introduced version that would have included state buildings. And that's actually fairly defensible because the state does have sovereign, ownership of its buildings. And that, of course, let me get to what I'm saying here. That district court in New York did say that the state does have an interest in protecting its buildings, and you can not tell the feds what to do, but it's also, and there's a lot to talk about here that I wish I had more time for. The federal law, Immigration Nationality Act, where you can arrest people without a judicial warrant, it's not specific where those arrests have to happen. So a state does have some authority in saying that not courthouses, not buildings, can it say not houses of worship? Can it say not schools? It's actually unclear. It's truly unclear. Like yeah.
So how much jurisdiction do we have over the public?
Yeah, and you do have some.
Right.
But to your ultimate question is, if a federal employee violates this law, they would be subject to this law, but how's that gonna work? And that's a good question. Same thing with the mask bill. It's like, how's that gonna work?
Yeah. Couple of years.
So if you could send me that case, or case, just so we have it on.
It was December of 2025, so it's really recent too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
It's being appealed, but yeah, it's helpful to have that.
yeah, it's their analysis. All right, thank you.
Sorry, so yeah, sorry to go.
Thank you.
5 minutes late for another place.
Yeah, but I can answer one question.
All right, well,
Okay,
Yeah.
so all these exemptions.
He's so close to me.
Thank you.
He would just be very mad if I just
I'll be-
left.
you're right.
All these exemptions on here are all pretty much have one thing in common, and they're all things regarding subsistence that somebody would expect to have in life. The one that confuses me the most is polling place. Because I think this is targeted at an immigration thing, and I'm not sure these folks would be able to. What US civil arrest warrant, or I should say state civil arrest warrant, would that be prohibiting?
Well, you mentioned child support.
Right,
Yeah,
but that's exempt.
right. If there's just a warrant, if there's a judge warrant. So again, the types of civil arrests are not common. Subpoena to come to court, some type of contempt of court where you, which is usually a subpoena and you don't show up. So there's not a large history in this country of civil arrest. So you're not really looking at a whole lot.
It seems like adding like gas station. I don't know. If somebody needs to be at a polling place, they're there to vote, correct? Typically?
The intent of the law would indicate, yeah, it's and the cross reference, which we're good now.
So I've just been informed my education committee is looking for you right now.
I figured.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That committee, since they,
I'll see you soon, I assume.
thank you, right? Thanks,
And I can come on Friday as well if you'd like me to come from.
Okay, all right. Yeah, we may need
Just be around.
When is Beth coming?
Yeah, municipal. Yeah, but that would only be during
we're
the.
down at 1:30.
Okay.
Uh,
It just seems strange that we have a walkthrough.
It isn't election.
It seems strange that we have a walkthrough if he couldn't answer all the questions.
Very specific.
she wasn't available today. I tried to get her today. She couldn't do it. So she'll cover that tomorrow. That happens. There's sometimes where
Seems
legislative council deal with different parts and we can't get them all in the same time. Yeah, so. Charlie.
Good afternoon. I'm Charlie Lisserman. I'm the policy director at the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Thank you. Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of S209. We greatly appreciate the committee's consideration of this bill and support the current inclusion of social services establishments like domestic and sexual violence organizations on the list of sensitive locations. As noted by Legislative Council, the Department of Homeland Security has had longstanding guidance that immigration and customs enforcement refrain from enforcement actions in sensitive locations. This guidance was rescinded in 2025 and resulted in a lot of concern and lack of clarity for providers, including domestic and sexual violence organizations. Domestic and sexual violence organizations provide life-saving services, shelter, legal support, safety planning, and more. This work is highly sensitive, and it often occurs during the most dangerous periods of a survivor's life. When a survivor is seeking support, it is an act of trust. Trust that reaching out will make them safer than remaining in an abusive home or with an unsafe home or with an abusive partner. Survivors already face so many barriers to seeking safety, and we feel that survivors, regardless of their actual or perceived immigration status, should not face an added barrier of fear that accessing support will expose them or their families to enforcement actions. S209, which includes domestic and sexual violence organizations in that list of sensitive locations would just offer clarity and consistency to survivors and the providers who serve them. We, again, appreciate the committee's attention to this issue, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Chuck? Yeah, Zach, go ahead.
So it's good to see you, Charlie. I assume that you're in support of the bill.
Yes.
Can you tell me why? Beyond the prepared remarks, I'm just curious why.
What I really think of is what is going through a survivor's mind when they are questioning whether or not to reach out and seek help to get themselves safe. There are so many barriers to seeking that safety. Your physical safety, your emotional safety, whether you have the finances to sustain yourselves and your children after you make that move. Until for a few years there, survivors did not have that added barrier of, if I go to this shelter, may I face an immigration enforcement action when I take that step. And that was a real, I think, boon to survivors and the providers for that period of time. And that does not exist for survivors anymore. And that will prevent people from seeking help. And so that is why we feel this bill is really important to prevent that chilling effect for them.
Do you think there are any possibilities in your mind that someone would take advantage of this bill?
I do not. I mean, our providers are still held to all state and federal laws, and this bill doesn't change that. It changes the decision-making process that a survivor will go through.
And that's exactly where I'm kind of going, is if federal enforcement was coming to one of your locations and they were demanding you to procure one of your patients or one of the victims that you're currently sheltering, would you comply?
I mean, I think that these situations are very fact specific, but as I noted, we still would have to comply with all state and federal laws.
Right. So I guess the way that I interpret what you're telling me and the way that the bill is written is that even if it's passed, even if, it seeks to accomplish whatever the bill's authors are looking to do, if federal enforcement came to one of your sites, there's nothing you could do anyways. You have to comply, or else you're in violation of federal law.
I think that it depends on the facts, it depends on the type of warrant, and, would certainly defer to our civil liberties experts for those details. But as I noted, our providers always follow state and federal laws. This bill would not change that.
Great. Happy to hear that.
And I'm not sure that you're correct about that. If somebody comes to the door without a judicial warrant.
Well, I'm not saying they're coming without a warrant. I'm just saying, if they're coming, and I mean, I know I wouldn't want to step in between myself and the federal law enforcement agent. I mean, that just isn't where I'd want to put myself, because that's where situations could become really difficult. And I would never, and here's the thing is, we hear enough tough stories in this room already. I would never want you and your staff to be put in a position where you're stopping a federal law enforcement investigation from happening, because that would put you in harm's way. And I just wouldn't want to see that.
Well, I appreciate that consideration.
Yeah.
Disagree with what the member said. I don't think.
We can disagree, but Martin, that's just perspective, right?
It is a perspective, but I want to make very clear that I don't think that somebody, if anybody comes to your door, law enforcement, without a judicial warrant, you shouldn't feel that you've been put in danger or jeopardy.
But I'm not saying
by saying, well, that's what I heard you say.
I'm just saying, if they're coming with a warrant in this case.
Again,
I just wouldn't want to put myself in between.
Right. If it's a warrant, they need to absolutely comply with a judicial warrant.
Right.
Not an administrative warrant. That's a different animal. So anyway, but that's not, I apologize for that. I didn't mean to have a debate with my fellow member here, but I had to just weigh in on that.
No apology is needed. And, just noting again, the language on social services establishments has been Department of Homeland Security guidance for several years. So, our providers understand what that means, and it will simply provide them the clarity and consistency they're looking for.
Any other questions for Charlie? Nope, good. All right, thank you. So we'll have Abel. Did I say it closely this time? Did I get close?
Olga will
And Olga? Yeah, please. Is there another chair for? Chair. So she's also not here for this. I'll see.
Very.
Yeah. Oh, yes, sir.
Taking up this bill very hard to deal with when we've only taken an office or whatever that word is from one part of legislative council when there's so many more pieces. to it. I get, but we don't have all of the legislative council yet to go and follow, for lack of a better word, proper protocol to get the answers
I agree.
that are needed here. I'm having a very, very, very difficult time trying to follow all this without all the legislative council stuff that we have to go with.
So I think the only other legislative council stuff that we have to go with, other than the fact that we've asked Rick a number of questions he's going to get back to us on, is the definition of education. That's all we have Beth St. James coming in to talk about. Otherwise, Rick is the person, he was here, he heard questions, he said he has to get back to us. But that doesn't mean we stall all other testimony because they've asked questions that legislative council have to come back to us for.
Okay.
So I do have, the witnesses now are going to talk more about kind of the impact of what they're seeing. I don't know how much they're going to get into the language at all, frankly. And we're going to hear from Falco Schilling, who can talk a little bit about the constitutional issues that only somewhat addressed in Rick.
So just for clarification, so I thought there was a lot more information that we needed from Ledge Council, including Rick to get answers back to us.
Right, Rick needs to provide us.
And we're taking up a pretty high level bill for lack of.
I mean, it's relatively straightforward, the bill. And again, I mean, frequently in all of our legislative council, questions come up and they come back to us later. And I don't see how this is different with respect to the questions we've asked of Rick.
So I think what I already heard is we put, those of us that were here in 2022 or whenever, the first bit of language that was put in there for protections and all this stuff. I remember the courthouses. I remember all that stuff there. It seems like now we're really expanding that scope. Correct?
Yes. And we need to hear from witnesses on the witness of that.
What's that? I'd like to hear more from lawyers, but okay.
So I mean, we've heard from Charlie with respect to some of, at least the domestic violence shelter. We did have a witness who was, I think, going to address place of worship, but apparently we've been unable to get a hold of her. We are reaching out to somebody from one of the hospital associations regarding that. So,
I get all that. It's the Ledge Council is what. And maybe I'm overreacting. I don't know. If I'm overreacting, I apologize. I'm trying to understand the full scope of what we're doing.
there seem to be more questions than usual that we're going to be hearing back. I will agree with you on that. I don't think that prevents us from hearing the next two witnesses. We only have two witnesses.
We just haven't been get really any clarity from Rick. And it just seems strange that we haven't had a full walkthrough of the bill.
Again, the only part of the walkthrough.
I understand, but we still haven't had a full walkthrough, which I think is what's frustrating.
We had a full walkthrough and there are particular questions.
So we heard about education.
About education.
We did not have a walkthrough.
I just, we have, who are here today, made the time to come here, and I just feel like it's
Right,
important to hear from.
we're proceeding with witnesses and we'll get more answers from Rick tomorrow or the next day. So, okay, if you could identify yourselves for the record and proceed with your testimony. Thank you very much for being here, for being patient.
My name is Abel Luna. I'll be interpreting, organizer of American Justice. I'll be interpreting for my colleague Olga. We'll be providing testimony, and then after Olga, I probably add something depending on how we're feeling. And also, if you're going to ask some questions, I ask you to please speak really loud and really slow because trouble hearing, and so I want to make sure that everything is communicated.
I was just gonna ask you the same thing.
Thank you.
If you could just slow down a little bit, because I have hearing aids too. And with your accent, it makes it a little difficult to understand. Where if you slow down a little bit, I'll be able to understand you much better. Thank you.
Ok, hola, mi nombre es Olga Cruz, soy una trabajadora migrante y estoy trabajando en una granja. Ella es mi hija, y mi otra hija está en la escuela.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Olga Cruz. I'm a dairy farm worker here in the state of Vermont. This is my daughter, and my other daughter is in school right now.
Creo que ya está más que claro del por qué estoy aquí ahora, del por qué estamos aquí ahora, más que nada para tener un poco de protección más en lugares donde estamos visitando.
And I think it's more than clear why we're here today. We're here today because we want to ensure that the places that our community is gathering and frequenting, those places are protected.
Creo que como residentes, porque estamos viviendo en Vermont por ya mucho tiempo, tenemos nuestras familias, como cualquier otra persona que está acá, tenemos nuestros hijos, tenemos compromisos que hacer, tenemos trabajos que hacer.
And, I want you to think of us as, residents of the state of Vermont because we have been here working and living for a long time. We have our families, we have community ties. We have our children here, and we're working just like any other Vermonter.
También tenemos cosas importantes que hacer, como visitar lugares, por ejemplo, como el DMV.
And there's also, important things that are happening in our lives. For example, just like anyone else, one of the places which we or our community frequents, it's, for example, the DMV.
Creo que en todos esos lugares, sinceramente, ojalá se pudiera crear algo donde estemos protegidos en cualquier lugar, pero estamos conscientes que eso no se puede. Pero por lo menos los lugares donde ya varios han mencionado, queremos un poco de protección para nosotros y para nuestras familias y para la comunidad que hoy no está aquí presente.
We want to ensure there's a lot of places where our community is gathering, not just the DMV. There's other places that have been mentioned here as we were reading the bill, that are covered. And we want to make sure that, all these different places are protected. We want to ensure that our community can gather safely, that our community is accessing some of these services without being worried of being detained.
Creo que ya han tocado este tema. Lo poco que hemos logrado entender aquí es que han salido varias preguntas, pero también estamos conscientes que no debemos, por ejemplo, tocar el tema de la guardería. Yo llevo a mi hija en una guardería. Creo que aquí no debe importar quién le está pagando la guardería de mi hija. Lo que debe importar ahora y el tema de aquí es que yo esté protegida llevando a mi hija en la guardería.
And, as we've been talking, we've been talking a lot. We have heard a lot. There's also, a lot of questions that have come up throughout the hearing. And one of those, questions is, well, who's going to pay for certain things? And we shouldn't be thinking about money, I want to make sure that as a mother, I feel, safe bringing my child to, the center where they take care of, where they take care of my child, and that shouldn't be up for question.
Creo que no podemos cambiar la realidad de muchas cosas que están pasando en Vermont, pero si está en sus manos protegernos como comunidad, estamos luchando mucho para que este cambio pueda llegar como lo hemos hecho por otras cosas.
And I understand that, making change or changing things is probably difficult. But that is, why we're here today. We want to ensure that you hear from us. It is in your hands to ensure that our communities feel safe. It is in your hands to ensure that, the places where we gather, our community can feel safe. We've done a lot of good job and a lot of good work in the state of Vermont to improve in that regard. but I think there's more that we can do.
También estamos conscientes que queremos respetar las leyes, pero también creo que cada uno de ustedes sabe que la migración está deteniendo gente aún sin una orden de arresto. No estamos queriendo meternos en ese tema de que no vamos a respetar si llegan con una orden, pero queremos ser respetados porque están deteniendo con o sin una orden.
Also, as we're talking about like immigration and people being arrested, I think it's important for you to know, that detentions are happening with a warrant or without a warrant. That is the experience of our community. And we want to make sure that, that is taken into account, that our rights and our humanity is being respected.
Si estoy yendo al hospital, si estoy yendo a mi iglesia, si estoy yendo a la escuela o a la guardería, quiero estar bien, o si yo haciendo mis cosas personales y ellas están en la escuela, quiero sentir la seguridad de que voy a regresar bien, voy a estar otra vez con mis hijas por la tarde, porque si yo soy arrestado en el DMV, ¿qué va a pasar con mis hijas? Obviamente uno está preparado para cualquier situación, pero no es lo mismo que una madre esté cuidando de sus propios hijos.
I want to make sure that as a mother, as a woman, I feel safe bringing, my child to the school. I want to make sure, that I feel safe, that my daughter is not going to be picked up, by immigration while she's at school. I think it's very different, and it's very difficult for me as a mother and as a woman to myself or imagine, something happening where I'm going to the DMV, for example, and I get arrested. What happens with my children? What happens with my kids? And so, those are things that you need to consider.
La importancia de que esto pase es que yo quiero que mi hija se sienta segura al yo estar participando en sus actividades, porque ella también tiene miedo por el hecho de nuestro color de piel o por el hecho de parecerme latino, parecerme mexicano o de cualquier otro país. Ella tiene miedo a que yo vaya a sus actividades porque dice, ¿y si le agarran? ¿Y si migración lo detiene en la escuela? Son muchas cosas que están pasando con nosotros en estos momentos que están poniendo en riesgo la salud mental también de nuestros hijos.
One of the conversations that I have with my daughter constantly is, and my daughter sort of, tells me, Mom, I feel, afraid that if you come to the activities at the school, if you come to the activities that I'm involved with, you're going to be picked up, right? And I'm afraid of that because of this, the skin of our color, the color of our skin, because, of our language. And if we look different, those are targets, that puts a target on our back, the reality that our communities are at a high risk. And so I want to ensure that goes through.
Pues esta es la realidad y es un poco de lo que yo quería hablar, y pues hay muchas cosas más que uno puede agregar, pero nuestra comunidad no quiere salir por el mismo miedo que existe, así que yo estoy aquí representando a mi comunidad y gracias por el tiempo.
This is sort of the reality that our communities are living and experiencing. Not everyone can be here today because people are afraid of, showing up and coming to the State House. But I'm here and I'm speaking for my community, so hopefully you can take that into account. So that was Olga's testimony, and if possible, I would like to add something and open it up for questions if you guys have any. I think it's a very sensitive issue, and I think it's super important that this conversation happens and that we ensure that our communities are safe. I've been living in Vermont for 13 plus years. That's a while, and I remember, and it was difficult to go down to grab a pizza or take a walk on the streets in Vermont because the reality of what could happen. It seems that Vermont has changed a lot. I think through the work of migrant justice, the work of other communities and organizations, Vermont has become a better state, not just for, for the migrant community, but really for anyone else. And it's also in our experience as an organization, and as a community, that changes only happen when there is legislation in place, and laws in place, that are comprehensive and that are, crafted to truly protect, the communities that are most affected. I think it's important to understand that, we've seen the benefit of, for example, the driver license campaign. We've seen the benefit of the fair and impartial policing policy. We've seen the benefit of people not being arrested at the courthouses. That has had a huge impact on our community. And so, having legislation that truly works and focuses on people's reality, it's a win-win for you guys. It's a win for our communities and for everyone else in the state of Vermont. We're living in very troubling times. As Olga mentioned, our communities are under attack through many different ways and directions. And I think that the rhetoric around the country, like anyone can get arrested. If you don't look like you don't belong here, you're at risk of deportation. I want you guys to think for a second what kind of impact that has on community members who are trying to access basic services. Women that are facing domestic violence. People that are trying to move freely throughout the state of Vermont by accessing a driver license. People that are trying to get help at the doctor or at the hospital. When you hear that, immigration can show up at these places, the DMV or any other place, it prevents people from actually going to these places. It prevents people from actually, living more fully and having a dignified life. And we're talking about, people that are milking the cows so that we can, drink milk or eat dairy products. We're talking about, people that are, cleaning the hotel rooms. We're talking about people that are probably washing the dishes when we go and dine at a restaurant or any place. These are our neighbors. These are people that are in our communities. And so it's important for you guys to to really think about, what kind of law, what kind of bill are we trying to pass? And I understand there's a lot of discussion and questions, but at the end of the day, it comes down to basic human rights. The more complicated we get, we tend to distance ourselves from the reality of what our communities are truly living. And so, we don't need to make it too complicated. It's about basic human rights. Who has, are we gonna ensure that our communities have access to going, to the hospital, to go get a driver license? What kind of laws are we creating? And I say that because, we're seeing a pattern across the state where, people are staying home. People don't want to go to the doctor, to the hospital, because people are afraid. It's true. You could go to, that idea that I might go to get some help and I might not make it back home. I might have to, get arrested, and then what's going to happen to my family, right? And so we're seeing a pattern where people are, not going to the hospital, the doctor. People are not going to the DMV to access the driver licenses. People that, practice different religion for a peace of mind or for well-being or mental health. People are staying away. Our community, it's sort of staying in the house. And so I think, as we think about, okay, how do we make Vermont a better state, a safer place for everyone? I think it's important to take into account, that this is important. Just like, places of worship, just like, schools and other places, places where our community frequents, the DMV and other places where our community is accessing basic services. And I think it's important for us to think about that, put ourselves in the shoes of a migrant immigrant mother who is afraid of going to dropping off their child at the care center, and so I think that is sort of the reality. And so we're urging you to urging the community to really take those things into account. This is, as Olga mentioned, this is the reality. This is what people are facing. This is the pattern that we're seeing. And this is not going to go away. So we have an opportunity here to truly make a change and ensure that, the people that are putting food on our tables, are not afraid of accessing basic services. And so,
So I think Ken has a question.
Yeah.
Karen?
Right.
Then Angie.
So I am trying my darnest to follow all this. When you were just talking, was that coming from you or from her?
Oh, that was
That was you?
my opinion.
Okay, so did you say you've been here for 13 years?
Yes.
And you've been living under fear for 13 years?
I work with Migrant Justice. I'm an organizer with Migrant Justice, and what I'm referring to is a basic pattern that we have seen in our community. Before there was a driver license, before there was a fair and impartial policing policy, before there was, the law, to prohibit arrest at courthouses. People were afraid of showing up. People were afraid of driving. Women were not leaving the farms and being in, suffering from domestic violence. And I'm saying that there's a history, when our communities are not protected, there is a pattern of people, being afraid of accessing basic services that people need. And so what I'm saying is, let's change that around. Vermont has done a great job and a good job of taking steps in the right direction to, make some improvements and to better the quality of life of our communities. But there is still, some way to go.
So my question was, for all 13 years, have you lived with this fear?
That's the experience of our community, the reality that our community is facing, yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Karen, Zach, and Angel.
I just want to thank you all for coming here. It's lovely to meet your daughter. And just really appreciate you sharing your story, your experience, and feel like critical community members. And I feel we need to do our work to make sure that all of our community members are protected and can get access to services. So I'm committed to doing what we can with this, and I'm sorry you're experiencing this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Hola, Oka. Bienvenidos. Hablo un poquito de español, pero preguntaré en inglés. Will, thanks for being here as well. And so I guess a couple of questions. I guess first to Olga, you'd mentioned that you'd seen in your community warrantless arrests. And I'm wondering if you can tell us where that happened.
Si yo pudiera mencionar todos, casi muchos arrestos que se han oído, la mayoría han sido sin una orden. Incluso ha pasado que por algún motivo detienen a un conductor de un vehículo y se están llevando también a la otra persona que está de copiloto. No necesariamente están solo llevándose a la persona que están buscando. Ha pasado mucho, tengo familiares que han sido detenidos, amigos, familias separadas. No se puede mencionar tantos que han sido arrestados sin una orden.
Entiendo, gracias. And Will, for you.
You don't understand.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Abel, lo siento.
Yes, there is a lot of places, if I could share, I probably wouldn't have enough time to name everything. The reality is that, yes, arrests without warrants are happening. And I'll just to give an example, for example, when there's a person or two people in a vehicle and the driver gets, pulled over by immigration, what usually ends up happening is that both persons get arrested, not just, they're not just focusing on the driver, but if you people think that you're undocumented, if you're an immigrant, that has been the reality. People have been arrested. You know, I have family, friends, I have members, my own family, I have friends. I know of a lot of families that have been separated because of this injustice.
And I'm sorry, I saw Will on the witness list. I came in late, and so Abel. And I guess in terms of your testimony specifically from migrant justice, in your view, does this bill go far enough?
I think no, we sat down with our community. There's summer we were talking about, well, you know, what do we need to do? What are some of the things that we need to include? And I think you know, there's room for improvement on the bill. One of the things I think, as we've been hearing and mentioning, a lot of things are included. You know, like the child care providers, the child care centers, as Olga was mentioning. You know, places of worship, hospitals, clinics, and I'm not going to name everything, but you know, but I think one of the places where our community is afraid of stepping into, it's the DMV, which is you know, a place where, you know, people need to go to get their driver licenses. So we've seen a pattern where people, you know, you get your driver permits online, and that's where people sort of stop. You know, they don't continue moving forward with the license because that requires you going into the DMV. It requires you sort of being public, and you know, people are afraid, and you know, the reality is that with everything that is happening, right? I think the question is, you know, or the question is, or maybe it isn't the question, right? But like the idea is that you know, we're this close of something horrific happening, and people being arrested, you know, the DMV and other places where, you know, and the idea is that through legislation, through this bill, we can prohibit some of, you know, we can prohibit that from happening. People are afraid because, you know, people are afraid of showing up because there is this, you know, fear of, okay, if I show up, I might be arrested. That's preventing people from accessing certain things, certain services, right? And so what we want to do is to make it more comprehensive. A lot of the things that are included are awesome. I think one of the things that we would like to, you know, for you guys to consider is the idea of adding, you know, public buildings. And again, you know, there's a fear, or people are afraid that this can get too broad, you know, but I think there's very clear examples such as the courthouses, right? That's a very clear example. You know, it's a public building, state building, and you know, it didn't get too broad. It got really specific, and I think what we're saying is there's very specific places where our community is gathering and frequenting, or trying to access services where we want to ensure that those places are safe for our community to go into. And so it's good, but if you guys are asking, can we make improvements? Yes.
Yeah, and so I guess, thank you for that. And so just one follow-up question. So were you all able to get a chance to help craft the language when the draft was going to the Senate?
Yes, we as migrant justice, we're involved.
You're involved in the crafting of the language. And on polling places, and this was a great question from my colleague, Representative Goodnow. He was wondering specifically whether polling places applied on the day of polling on the election day, or if something's identified as a polling place would apply year round in off election cycles. Do you guys have a view on that, of how you'd like to see that applied?
Esa es la pregunta ahorita, es para los lugares donde se vota, ¿verdad? Básicamente tenemos una opinión, pero como a veces es como algo muy temporal, donde la temporada donde se está votando, pero es algo que también, ¿cómo lo ven ustedes? ¿Debe ser importante? ¿No debe ser importante? Y creo que va con esa idea de que todos los lugares deben estar seguros, tenemos miembros que pueden hacerlo.
Sí, yo creo que como lo dije desde un principio, es de que estemos seguros en cualquier lugar que vayamos. Eso va incluido todo. También dije que no podemos exigir todo, como por ejemplo nosotros tenemos que frecuentar las tiendas y son cosas realmente importantes y esenciales para nuestra vida, pero sí, quisiéramos que todo fuera incluido para estar protegido en cualquier lugar que vayamos.
Gracias.
Basically, the idea is that, we want to make this bill as comprehensive as we can. We would like for everything to be included, anything that we've mentioned and anything else that, that protects our community, that is idea. That includes polling places, that includes the DMV, that includes the doctors, the hospital, child care centers. We would love to see everything, shopping centers, that's, where we go and buy our food. People are, where we go and buy our food. Those are essential needs and essential things that we need as a community in order to be well off. Sort of to answer the question, and if I may add, with sort of piggybacking on what Olga just mentioned, one of the things that we're seeing also is, people being afraid of going to buy their own food at shopping centers. We have had, calls from community members where, hey, I see this weird person at the store that's looking at me. I'm not sure if it's an agent or it's not an agent, and they're asking me questions. And so, word gets around, people are afraid of going to buy their own food, and that creates dependency and, on the farmer, dependency on someone else that's going to take advantage of that. So I think, as I mentioned, under the sun, we would like to see sort of everything included to make sure that our communities are extremely protected. We know that it's hard to pass everything. But sort of that's the task of this committee, to figure out, how we can to ensure that our communities are safe and protected. ¿Sí, algo más que quieras agregar?
Muchas gracias por tu tiempo.
Angela, in this last question, comment.
Thank you so much. I was going to ask a similar question about what's missing. And I hear you saying the DMV came up a lot. I would love to add that. And I think it makes sense to add state buildings. And I'm aware of the fact that we're sitting in a state building right now and we call it the People's House.
Yeah.
I spoke with Representative Dodge just before this hearing and we were talking about that fact that it's so important to hear your voice on this matter and a number of other matters. We want people, Vermonters, to feel safe coming here to inform our laws. And so it seems to me really important to include other state buildings, particularly the building we're in right now.
Sí, creo que la importancia que tiene el DMV es que queremos estar protegidos porque nosotros ya hemos logrado aquí también poder obtener nuestra licencia como trabajadores migrantes o personas que ya estamos viviendo aquí en Vermont. Tenemos que frecuentar esos lugares. Muchas personas obviamente están sacando sus licencias o sacando cualquier papel en el DMV y el que yo corra un riesgo ahí, obviamente eso va a detener que las personas puedan también moverse libremente. Eso es algo que también no queremos, de que la gente, por el hecho de no poder moverse, también mucha gente. ¿Sí?
Okay. Yes, the GMB, it's an important place, as everything else that we've mentioned. It's a place where our community, we fought for the driver license and we won the driver licenses back in 2012, 13, to ensure that our communities can move freely, without fear of being, pulled over and deported. That our communities, can have access to, buying their food and other things. So we won these laws, right? And we want to make sure that we can access these buildings where that is the only place where you can go get a driver license, right? And what happens, right? For example, I'm arrested at the DMV. that's going to create a chilling effect that's going to affect not just myself, my family, but everyone else in the community. All of a sudden, people are not going to go to the DMV. All of a sudden, people are going to be afraid of stepping into this, accessing these services that we have won before. And so I think it's important to link both things, right? We want something, we want to access it, but we're afraid of doing so. Because we're at risk of being, detained or deported and separated from our families. And so,
También lo de que usted mencionaba, lo de los edificios federales, creo que es importante de que nosotros estemos protegidos por ese lado también, ya que para que ustedes puedan ver la realidad que nosotros vivimos en Vermont, todo lo que nosotros estamos pasando, y es que siempre es una cosa u otra. Tenemos que venir hasta acá para mostrar lo que está pasando, porque si no, ustedes cómo van a saber lo que estamos viviendo acá, muchas cosas pasando. Entonces, el hecho de que yo me sienta con miedo de que ese lugar no va a estar protegido y que puede que allá afuera me estén esperando, es un miedo horrible que ustedes no se pueden imaginar, porque no estoy con mi familia, mi esposo está en otro lado, mi hija en otro lado. ¿Qué va a pasar con ellos?
As you were mentioning, the State House, for example, we want to, that'll be great if we can add, not just the DMV or, public buildings, but also state buildings, where, for example, the State House, that is a place where, we have to come back year after year after year, because we're facing many issues, and the only thing to change them is by coming to the State House, the People's House. And it's needed so that you guys can hear the reality that we're facing, that you guys can hear the stories of our community. Sometimes I'm afraid of stepping into the State House as I'm now. I'm afraid that as I'm leaving the State House, I'm gonna get picked up, and I'm afraid because my husband is not here, my other daughter is not here, and sort of what's gonna happen with them. So ensuring that the people feel safe entering the State House, just as any other building, it's going to be critical.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here, and I really appreciate your testimony. So we'll go to we are kind of running out a little bit of time, so we're going to just go right to Felco, and then we do have a few people coming in at 3:00 to answer a few more questions on the budget issues. So questions we had yesterday. Felco, thank you for being back. Frequent flyer this week.
Yep. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Falco Schilling. I'm the Advocacy Director for the American Civil Liberties Union of Vermont. So I'm here today to talk to you about S209. And so S209 is a bill that you've heard a good amount about in terms of the kind of four corners of the bill and what it tries to protect. And I'm going to walk through that, some of the legal underpinnings of it, because I think we got a little bit less of that with this bill than we did yesterday, though a lot of that is overlapping in some of those same justifications and some of those things that need to be considered. I also have some proposals for potential modifications to the bill that I'd like to share with you. So I can kind of start there that, we're supportive of the intent of this bill and for the state, which is for the state to protect the core functions of our state government from interference and disruption caused by warrantless civil arrests at sensitive locations. And as have been mentioned by other witnesses, for years, it was the policy of folks like the Department of Homeland Security to limit arrests at certain enumerated sensitive locations. And I think what you see in what passed the Senate is an attempt to many ways capture that list of locations that was in that guidance issued in 2011, then reissued in 2021 within this bill. And so I think many of those line up with the legal underpinnings. Some of those might have some more concerns around the state's ability to actually enforce a prohibition if we were to put one in place. So in that guidance, that included schools, including K through 12 schools, vocational trade schools, colleges and universities, medical and mental health facilities, places of worship or religious studies, places where children gather, social services establishments, places where disaster emergency response relief is provided, places where funerals and places where funerals, graveside ceremonies, rosaries, weddings, or other religious or civil ceremonies are observed or occur, and places where there's ongoing parades, demonstrations, or rallies. So obviously not all of those are covered within the bill, but that was what was in the DHS guidance in terms of trying to preserve access to those sensitive locations so folks could fully participate within society. So in January 20th, 2025, DHS rescinded its previous guidance and left enforcement in these sensitive locations to the discretion of individual officers. So there's no longer a policy in place. And what we have seen since the rescission of that memo is there has been enforcement in a number of these locations. I think we've seen most examples around schools. We saw in Minnesota where there were certain school districts that had to, close classes and no longer hold in-person learning because of some of the disruptions they saw around immigration enforcement. And we've also seen, and this has left folks, as you've heard, concerned about being able to fully utilize access to these essential services, which can jeopardize livelihoods and in some circumstances, their very lives. So that brings the question of there's this concern about people trying to access these services and being able to maintain the core functions of our state government. The question is, what can the state do about it? So as recognized by the 10th Amendment of the federal Constitution, Vermont retains broad sovereign police power to protect the health, safety, legal rights, and welfare of its residents. You heard a little bit about this yesterday in terms of the police powers, just not necessarily limited to actual police, but it can encompass many other things within those categories. Vermont also has sovereign power over its property, its own government, and the means by which the state exercises and implements its sovereign prerogatives. And Vermont is just a healthier, more prosperous state when all residents can access the services which they're eligible and feel empowered to fully participate in civic, economic, and political life. Residents of the state should not hesitate to participate in court proceedings, attend school, seek necessary medical care services, or shelter out of fear. And civil arrests conducted without a judicial warrant have the potential to disrupt and interfere with these services and operations that are vital to the health and safety and well-being of Vermont residents. Moreover, fear of being subject to civil arrest conducted without a judicial warrant deters residents from seeking and participating in services beneficial to the individual health, safety, well-being, and collective well-being of the state. And for those reasons, we and many Vermonters across the state are asking the legislature to prohibit civil arrests without a warrant at locations in which the state has sovereign interest in protecting the efficient operations and a sovereign interest in ensuring the maximum access in order to achieve and protect the health, safety, and well-being of its residents. Now, we do have some concerns about, with those underpinnings and the legal underpinnings within our 10th, our authority within the 10th Amendment, that there are some places where there might be some questions about how far it can go. But historically speaking, in terms of folks being concerned about enforcement happening, there's two sources of protection. So you heard from Rick and Ledge Counsel about the common law protection around courthouses, and we also have a provision that prevents the arrest of legislators when they are trying to conduct their duties. I've even heard of legislators who be able to defer civil tickets because they said, look, I don't have time. I need to get to a vote. And that has happened, and then folks have followed up later. So those have been used and have been on the books for quite a long time. The other is the Fourth Amendment. And the Fourth Amendment is one that is not exercised by government, but is exercised by individuals or groups of individuals against the use of state power. And so in some of the instances, we think that the best protection individuals might actually have is asserting their Fourth Amendment rights. So just as we talked about before, in your own home, you have the right to not allow a law enforcement officer onto your premises, into your home, unless they have a judicial warrant. So that is where then you no longer have the option of not complying. But if a law enforcement officer comes to your door, they don't have a warrant, you say, I'm not allowing you on the premises unless you come back with a warrant. That's something that any one of us can do. It also applies in private institutions and private businesses, other places like that. So that is a place where that's another source that individuals have to try and assert rights against interference by law enforcement or others. And we think this bill is right in its focus on extending protections of courthouses. And as case law says, that is probably where we're on the safest constitutional ground. The closest we stay to the example of the courthouse, the better ground we are on in terms of legal protections. And I think you heard that some from Rick as well. And you know, as the close more analogous we can make some of those restrictions on when arrest can happen, the better legal ground we're getting. As we've heard, this is somewhat untested in a number of these areas. And so as we give this advice, we can't point to case law on point or a number of these things, but it's our best understanding of existing case law and how the state could proceed to minimize any potential legal exposure. And I think when I talk about legal exposure in this case, my biggest concern is not that the state could put forward a statute that might be struck down, because we have severability built into our statute. So if there was one location where we said arrest could not happen in this location and one did, and it was challenged, we tried to enforce that, there was a challenge and that it had to be struck down, you know, that would not be a huge detriment to the state of Vermont other than incurred litigation costs. But a larger concern is creating a false sense of safety for individuals who might be subject to arrest. So those are some of the things we're trying to balance when we're looking at this bill. So one area that I think raises some concerns from the perspective of the ACLU is the inclusion of houses of worship, because though that is an area we think is deserving of strong protections, there could be challenges when the government is trying to regulate the activities that happen within a house of worship. So that is one that we have to mention, and one that we flagged for the Senate as well. I know folks could probably argue it the other way, that you are stopping the government from interfering with the practice that might be happening within that house of worship. Though we've also seen examples coming out of Minnesota, for instance, where you had a church where the pastor was an ICE agent, and we don't know what activities that congregation might want to be conducting and how they might want to move forward. So in terms of the things contained in this bill, I think that's probably the one that's maybe the furthest afield from protecting the core functions of state government. Whereas something like state buildings, as you've heard discussed, which was removed from the Senate version, is on a very strong ground in terms of protecting the core functions within government buildings. And I think there's some discussion around polling places as well, and some questions about that. I think polling places in particular have a very strong justification, because if people are being deterred from being able to exercise their fundamental right to vote, that it gets at really some of the core functions within our democracy and the inability for people to participate. And I know one of the things that was raised is that non-citizens are generally not voting, though there are some municipalities in the state where the non-citizens can vote on local matters. It could have a chilling effect in those municipalities. But we've also seen that the practice of DHS in their arrests is not only targeting non-citizens, and also targeting people who are trying to go through an immigration pathway in a legal way. Folks who have legitimate asylum claims, which have been made themselves identified to immigration authorities, have been trying to go through all the legal pathways. Those folks are still being brought in. They're still being detained. And with the prevalence of Kavanaugh stops, this creates an additional chilling effect. So the Supreme Court said that the immigration officials can detain people based on perception of race, national origin, and other, as long as it's paired with one other factor. So that also further could chill people's ability and desire to participate in public life, things like elections, things like entering government buildings and other places. So I think the addition of polling places makes a lot of sense and falls under that similar justification for courthouses, where you need someone to be in that court for the court to proceed. If that person is not there, the court cannot proceed. We also have a justification there in terms of the traveling to and traveling from. Someone has a court appointment. That they can, they could call a judge. They can show they are meant to be at this place at this time. If someone is directly transporting someone, that's also within what is some of what is discussed. But so that's, I know, another point that was raised. But I think largely to say, we're supportive of this bill. We're supportive of these efforts. We think it's extremely important. Another piece that I think could be added into this bill, or other similar pieces of legislation to help bolster and go above and beyond the protections that are offered here, beyond the additional locations that I discussed, is the inclusion of guidance for the private sector So if you look at H 745, which is a House bill, which was trying to get at a number of similar things, it went a different route in terms of saying that if you are operating a sensitive location, you're required to post public and non-public spaces, have a procedure, and not allow judicial warrantless arrest to happen on those locations. It went a different way in trying to offer those protections. Paired with that, that bill envisioned asking the Human Rights Commission to produce a guidance for folks operating in the private sector to give them a better understanding of what exactly their rights are in terms of when they do need to allow law enforcement officers onto their premises, when they have a right to refuse, and other things like that. And so I think it'd be good to hear from the Human Rights Commission, either in this bill or other bills, if you're considering this, about the possibility of creating a state guidance, because we are doing a lot of know your rights work right now. Our attorneys have been going across the state holding webinars. We have one coming up with Representative Ballot quite soon, talking about some of these things. And, we can do a lot of legal education, but we keep getting questions, even when folks have talked to us already, and having something that's been produced by the state that folks feel like they can rely on, I think would help provide more of a sense of safety. That would be especially helpful in places like a place of worship where you have that Fourth Amendment protection. You can exercise those rights. And so that's something that it's included in the language of H 745, and whether it's in this bill or a different bill would be something worth considering or hearing from the Human Rights Commission on. I think they're willing to do that, even if it's not necessarily in statute, but that could be something that is helpful in making sure people feel comfortable exercising their rights as individuals who are on their own private property. And I think with that, I'll kind of wrap up my presentation on the bill and say we really support this effort. We appreciate the committee taking this up and trying to move this forward, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Other questions?
All right.
Go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
I'm just curious, in your opinion, is it helpful that there is this, sounds like we can look back to years of guidance from the Department of Homeland Security, would previously shown an interest in carving out these spaces, limiting civil arrest in certain spaces. Does that history help our case from a legal perspective, or is it irrelevant?
It's my opinion that I think that does help the state's case. As we heard yesterday, when we're talking about a possible intergovernmental immunity defense, one of the questions is the state trying to control the activities of a federal actor, or is it incidental to the activities of a federal actor? And I think by the existence of those practices for years, that shows that it is not necessary to conduct enforcement activities within those areas to effectuate the goals of DHS. So I think that's something, though, that would not, that is something that a court, I think, would take into consideration, similar to how the case you heard about yesterday in California took into consideration the fact that there was no guidance, requiring masking and basically leaving that up to the discretion of individual officers. Similarly, in this case, enforcement at these sensitive locations is left up to the discretion of individual officers. So I think that would help bolster, since that was a pattern in practice for years, bolster the argument that in putting these restrictions in place, the state was not trying to control the activities of law enforcement, but might have an incidental impact on it, which would help it survive a challenge. But that's my opinion.
And just one more question about I want to make sure I understand the Fourth Amendment versus 10th Amendment functionality, I guess, and uses. Is it the opinion of the ACLU of Vermont that the Fourth Amendment essentially already provides a good amount of protection, and that this would be a supplement to that, or?
So I think there are two different sources of protection, and it also depends on how they're exercised. So within this bill, what I see the state trying to do, and as I tried to, one thing that might be helpful is kind of listing out some of the purposes of this bill, which I tried to enunciate some of what we view as those purposes of this bill. The 10th Amendment, that's a right that gets to be exercised by the state. The state says we are going to prohibit these activities or require these activities in certain situations so that we can ensure the core functions of our government can move forward, people can be included in daily life, and we can maintain, the order we seek to within the state. So that's something that the state can assert. There are limitations in terms of how far that might be able to go. Whereas the Fourth Amendment, those are rights that are held by an individual. And they are not, you can waive those rights at different times under different situations. So say a law enforcement officer comes to your door without a warrant and says, "Can I come in?" You can allow them in. And then, until you actually assert those rights, they are moving forward with the understanding that you are not asserting those rights and they have access to those private areas. So that requires a little bit of public education to folks about when they can exercise those rights. So they are there, but they need to be exercised. And that can be done in the form, for especially businesses, in the form of signage and in the sign of verbal assertion of those rights. But I think that's one of the differences, it's who can assert those rights, because the 10th Amendment is asserting the rights of the state, often in the face of potential federal action, whereas the Fourth Amendment are individuals asserting their rights against government action, whether it be state or federal officers. So in the same way that, any law enforcement officer comes to your door, you have the right to say, "I don't want to enter without a warrant," similar to your car, similar to other areas where you have those protections. So I think they're complementary, and I think them working in concert makes a lot of sense. And from what I've heard from folks in the community, there's a definite desire to get a better understanding what those rights are and how to exercise them. This also might be a preview for testimony later in the week, but then there's also a concern that, rights without remedies are not really rights. And so then there's another question about how folks would be able to have a remedy if those rights are violated, say, as we've seen in some situations where agents are entering homes without judicial warrants over the objection of individuals. What do you do in those situations? What recourse? And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that on Friday with H 849 as a way to think about that. But so we support both approaches, and I think they pair well together, both with the state asserting its rights and trying to educate individuals about how to effectively assert their rights in situations where those might even be stronger, because there's a lot more case law developed around when you can assert your Fourth Amendment rights and how those apply to individuals. And, some stronger protections there and more well-trodden ground than some of the 10th Amendment interactions that might come into play in this bill.
All right, any other questions? Not see any? Thank you very much, Falco.
Thank you.
We'll continue our discussion on Friday, so appreciate it. So we have a few people who, Steve, who are going to just answer some questions that may not take very long, that folks had regarding the budget memo. So I'm looking for my memo to ask the questions. I guess we'll start with Sarah, if you could join us, and Angela, do you want to clarify, because you've had.
Yeah. Hi, Sarah. Thank you for being here.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
I was hoping to hear from you again on a note that I had. I was looking for the memo as well, but here we go. I have in my notes that the $450,000 one-time allocation appropriation last year was divided. And I'm trying to understand that. So 250,000. So that money, 450,000, goes to the Center for Crime Victim Services, correct?
That one-time $450,000 allocation, yes, went to the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services.
Okay.
And there was some language in the budget that said that was to be directed to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund.
You turned up, I apologize.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Sorry, are you having a hard time hearing me? Is that any better? Might be on my end.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I missed that because I couldn't quite hear you.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, the $450,000 was one-time dollars in last year's budget. There was some language in the budget indicating that that was to be directed to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund. It went to the center. We met with them early in the fiscal year, or right after the legislature adjourned. And they requested that they hold $200,000 of those funds back in the fund. And so it was really just $250,000 of that 450 ultimately went out to the field and was divided between the 15 member organizations of the network.
Okay.
And in terms of the rationale for that, truly, I've Jennifer Pullman and I have talked about this multiple times. I'm sure she'd be happy to talk to you about it. It was really, their recommendation to do so and had to do with their administration of the fund.
Okay. There was some confusion about that yesterday, I think, about what exactly happened with the one-time funds in FY26. And so for FY27, the request for 450,000 addition to have that added to your base rather than, a one-time, in that case, the full 450,000 would go to the network. Is that correct? Or is is there still this pass-through mechanism?
There is still a pass-through mechanism. And so it would really have to do with kind of what the directive language is in the budget, but we are getting monthly updates from the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services. And the last update I received was that we had a $350,000 deficit in the current year. So when we get to July 1, they'll be short $350,000 and would have to cut that from providers in the field. Separately, the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services has for many years said that they don't receive any funds for administering the special funds. And so they've made a request for $95,000 to support their administration. So the $450,000 request that I put in my memo includes that administrative support as well as the $350,000 shortfall. And, they may be able to provide you with a more up-to-date, estimate of kind of where they're going to end the year. But the last I heard was just over 350. It was like 368 that they were going to be short.
So would that, if things work similarly to last year, would you have any reason to believe that in that case, then the network would actually receive, I didn't do the math, like about $100,000? If we're taking out the 350 and the administrative, I mean, it's less than 100,000, isn't it?
Yeah, all the money, just to be super clear, none of the money comes to the network, meaning like the network organization. It goes out to these funds are for our member organizations. So the 450 would include 350 to our member organizations, or just over what they need in order to stay whole. And then the remainder staying at the Center for Crime Victim Services to support their administration of the fund.
So 350 and 150, is that what I understood?
It's like 350 and 100.
Yes.
Oh, right, I'm sorry.
Question. That's on this. Sure.
Yeah, Karen and Tom.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't know if you've seen our memo.
No, I have not.
Okay. I'm just curious. I feel like there might be a repetition of it, that we have the 450,000 that the network is advocating for, and then Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services is seeking the
95.
Well, it's 102,000, and it's to administer grants. So,
well, what I will say is that if the 450 goes to the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund, and we're keeping folks whole, like level funding them from this fiscal year to the next fiscal year, the worst case scenario is that we don't have to come back to you next year for as much money. If, so I think you may be right, Representative Dolan, that, you know, the 450, we had included the, administrative fund, the roughly $100,000 in administrative funds for the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services. But if the 450 goes into the fund and the center is funded elsewhere for their 100,000, then the worst case scenario is they have less of a deficit next year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have to just double check that we're not double counting, that, like, where's that $102,000
Yeah.
coming from?
Yes, and I'm just not understanding fully how, we can't, like, I think the term you used, Sarah, was directive language in the budget.
Yes.
I'm wondering if we need to suggest some directive language to it, to just keep the network, the fund, the domestic and sexual violence fund, like, level funded, right? Is that what would take 350,000?
Yes, I think if, and I'm happy to send you some potential language, but I think essentially the language would be directed to the domestic and sexual violence special fund to be distributed to Vermont Network member organizations in order to level fund those organizations in FY27.
And that would be the 350, just to be clear.
Yes, I will follow up with the center and try to get the most up-to-date estimate as of right now, but the last I heard, it was just over $350,000.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I think if you could share that language, I tried to write it down quickly, but that would be great.
I'm happy to follow up in an email, and I will also follow up with Jennifer Pullman and Carol Brochu at the center and just try to get the latest and greatest estimate on kind of what the deficit is looking like.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
I'd also like to have Jen come in here just to
Yeah, Jen, yeah.
give us,
Yeah.
fill us in on
No,
her thoughts on it, but, Sarah, I'm just wondering, the fiscal year you're in compared to the last fiscal year, the entities that you deal with and support, you know, financially on some level, how much they increased from the last budget to the fiscal year we're in now?
$250,000.
So you, in a sense, lay terms, you get $250,000 raises, or they have to come in with, I gotta believe they gotta come in with some kind of proof that they need it, I guess, or new programs, or whether they've given raises to, you know, to their people or whatever. All the above.
Great question, Representative Burdett. So as I'm sure you can imagine, these funds are one part of their budgets. And there are other funding streams that some of which have been negatively impacted by kind of the shifting federal landscape. And so what we're hearing from our member organizations is that in general, the funds they're getting in the domestic and sexual violence fund, they're really not seeing a net increase in their budgets. They're seeing it. These are helping to fill other holes. But I think you're right that these are used for core organizational operations, and that's mostly salaries.
Right, was some of the money potentially to replace some of the federal funding that they lost?
For some organizations, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Sarah? All right, not seeing. Thank you so much, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Yep.
We'll go to Terry Carsones next. Thank you, Terry, for joining us from Rutland. Is that right? And you're on mute still.
Sorry.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you. Greetings from the Rutland Criminal and Family Courthouse.
Excellent. So if you could, I think you're the one who had the question, or the question was what, if you could talk a little bit more about the request to go from the limited service to the permanent positions. If you could just address that a little bit further. We're
Sure.
kicking around discussions and we weren't sure about that, but go ahead.
Right. Thank you, Terry Corson, State Court Administrator. And Greg Mosley, I think, is also connected. He's our Chief of Finance and Administration in case there's kind of specific finance questions that I don't know the answers to. But in general, the fiscal year 24 appropriation to the judiciary included 26 positions, and they were funded in the general fund, but they were termed limited service, which is unusual because typically if your position is funded in the general fund, it's a permanent position. This came about at the very end of the session. It was kind of confusing, and Greg spoke with them to ask for clarification. And we were told that they're termed limited service, but longer extended limited service than at that time limited service. This was kind of just following the COVID era. Limited service typically was like a 2-year, maybe 3-year at the most kind of duration. So they said, consider it more extended. And they suggested using 4 years because we said when we hire people, we need to tell them for how long is this position. And they suggested 2028, and recommended that we come back before then in order to have a conversion of the limited service title, if you will, to permanent. In the meantime, ever since then, these have been part of the general fund, part of our base budget. So the conversion doesn't, from what I understand, then allow for any new monies. It's monies that's already part of our budget. At the same time that we were given in the statute these 26 positions, the Sheriff's Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs had 9 positions, same kind of approach, limited service, come back. They came back last year and got their conversion of those positions to permanent positions. So we felt since now all of those 26 positions have been filled, they were thrilled to have them, hate to lose them, and they're starting to get nervous. Okay, we're told through 2028, it's 2026. Do we start looking for another job, or is this something that we can rest assured that we have this position? So that was the reason behind our coming this year to ask for that conversion. But that's the background to it.
Hi, Terry. So the limited positions, were they, first off, we heard from Trevor Squirrel this morning that it is a little different as far as that money for these types of positions coming through the general fund, that they usually come from grants from somebody. And so, there's a definite end date to them anyway. So totally understand your confusion, I guess you could say, as far as the way this one's working, but and I'm not sure why they were created in the first place. Were they created to help out with the backlog? Was that the original reason?
No, because they include first 10 judicial assistants, 11 court security. I mean, the court security positions are not geared to the backlog. We need court security at courthouses, period. No, whether
Right.
you have 1 case or 100 cases. And the judicial assistant positions in particular, we were asked to basically analyze what is the need of the courts, because we were, in my view, perennially understaffed in the courts, always kind of scrambling to even have basic coverage. So we did an analysis statewide of cases filed, full-time positions per cases filed, and there was quite a disparity from county to county in terms of that ratio. So the 10 judicial assistants were designed to ensure at least a base modicum of coverage in all of the courts. So that's where the judicial assistants positions came, not connected to the backlog. I mean, with the backlog, you're working continually all day, every day, 8 hours for the day, whether you have, I guess, 100 cases that you're working on or 400 cases that you're working on. It's not, the backlog is not going to go away such that, oh, well, we need fewer judicial assistants because we have fewer filings. Just with the number of new filings that come in consistently, there's a base level of need that, again, unless, I don't know, people stop litigating or people stop committing crimes, you're not going to have a change, at least for the past, 50 years, as long as we've been keeping these records.
Yeah, I don't know where you said it or where I picked it up about the positions were for the backlog, but I'll have to try to figure that out. Who brought that up?
Well, during the pandemic, my understanding is that there were limited service positions that were geared to a variety of things, including all of the workplace kind of chaos with so many people leaving when, remote requirements, and also the electronic filing coming on, electronic case management, pivoting to remote hearings, trying to get caught up, or I guess transitioning to the remote hearings. So I think there was, if you will, a flurry of activity that was more temporary, and that's why there were the limited service positions during the pandemic. But these positions are not geared to that, set of circumstances.
Right. Okay. Next question would be for the state's attorney, so I won't ask you. So, all right, thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Carrie. I appreciate you being flexible and available.
Oh, no trouble. Anytime. Thank you for the chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And next we'll go to legal aid. I believe we have, I'm not sure who we have on. Do we have
Hi,
Bessie?
yes. Hi.
Okay.
I don't know why my camera's not working.
Well, we can hear you fine.
Okay. I'm just gonna try one thing.
There you are. There you are.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bessie Weiss. I am the Interim Executive Director of Vermont Legal Aid. And I understand that you have a question about the $235,620 that we were proposing as an inflationary increase to our base Agency of Human Services funding.
Correct. Yeah, we were trying to understand what exactly that was. That it's because, I mean, we've seen other places where they haven't used the terminology inflationary increase, and if that's really what this is, as opposed to, well, you describe it. I'm not going to try to go back to what the question was, but.
Sure. So we have not received any increase in that base funding since for the past 3 years. And so we made a simple calculation of 3% of that base funding and did not compound it, but we times it by 3, and that's how we arrived at the number. And go ahead, sorry.
So essentially, that's following what the governor's standard or requirements for the administration was, which was 3%, no more than 3% increase. I think that we've seen that the past at least 3 years, and probably much longer than that. Is that kind of why the 3% is trying to match what the rest of the state government, that was their guideline?
To be honest, that was not what we were thinking of, but we certainly have not received that. But we were just thinking, inflation's been somewhere usually in the area of, actually, Andrew's saying maybe we were thinking of that a bit. I just saw a message from her, but I had understood that we were just thinking of inflation being somewhere in that area. And we're trying to be actually really conservative about our ask because, we did not add in the much larger percentage increases that we've all faced in trying to provide healthcare to our employees. This was a way of us trying to kind of just stay in place and not further erode our ability to provide these services.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And I think could very well be that that 3% was set, by the administration, sort of reflecting the average inflation. So, all right, well, that was the main question that had come up. I think that you've answered our question. Anything else for Bessie? I don't see anything else. Thank you so much for being available on such short notice.
Of course, thank you for the opportunity.
All right, thank you. All right, so we will go off live until tomorrow at 1 because we are in the House chamber all morning for voting on things. So